My name is Connor. I'm 34 years old, and I built my company from nothing after my father called me useless and gave his entire fortune to my younger brother Tyler. For years, I worked to prove him wrong while he never even called on my birthday. Now, suddenly, my phone won't stop ringing with his desperate calls. The empire he built is crumbling, and he needs my help. Before I continue my story, I'd love to know where you're watching from. Take a second to drop your location in the comments. Hit that like button and subscribe if you want to hear more stories about finding strength when family lets you down. This might change how you think about what real success looks like. Growing up in our sprawling suburban home, I always felt like I was performing on a stage where the sole audience member, my father Walter, never applauded. From my earliest memories, his face wore the same expression when looking at me: mild disappointment. He was a self-made businessman who built a commercial real estate empire from scratch, and he expected nothing less than perfection. My mother Melissa was the buffer between us, the translator who could interpret my childish achievements into language my father might appreciate. Connor made the honor roll again. She would announce at dinner, while my father would merely grunt and ask if I was first in my class. When I wasn't, the conversation would shift to business matters that bored a 10-year-old, but were deemed more important than my adequate accomplishments. Everything changed when Mom died from cancer when I was 12. The day after her funeral, Dad went back to work. I still remember sitting alone in my room, surrounded by sympathy cards I didn't know what to do with, while Dad locked himself in his office, making calls. The warmth in our house vanished with Mom, replaced by a chilly efficiency that governed our lives moving forward. Tyler was only 7 when Mom died, young enough that Dad seemed to transfer all his protective instincts to him. While I was expected to man up and handle my grief privately, Tyler was allowed to cry. Dad would sit with him, awkwardly patting his back in a rare display of physical affection I never received. As we grew older, the pattern became unmistakable. Tyler's B+ was celebrated, while my A- was questioned. When I made varsity baseball as a sophomore, Dad attended one game, scrolling through emails on his phone. When Tyler joined the debate team in middle school, Dad hired a private coach and attended every competition. "You should have seen Tyler today," became my father's favorite conversation starter at dinner. "The kid has a natural instinct for negotiation. A born businessman." Meanwhile, I sat quietly eating, my own business ideas locked inside journals my father never asked to see. When I was 16, Dad married Grace, a woman barely 15 years older than me. She arrived with expensive tastes and little interest in being a stepmother to teenagers. "Your father works so hard," she would say whenever I expressed disappointment in his absence from school events. "The business doesn't run itself." The business. Bellman Properties. It was always the third presence in our home, more real and demanding than any family member. From childhood, I dreamed of joining my father there, of finally finding the arena where I could win his approval. I studied real estate journals, took extra economics classes, and drafted improvement plans for struggling properties in his portfolio. I kept these in a binder he never asked to see. My high school graduation was a perfect encapsulation of our family dynamic. Dad and Grace arrived late, missing my speech as class vice president. At the family celebration afterward, he spent 20 minutes praising Tyler's recent debate win to my friend's parents, while I stood awkwardly holding my honor cords. When a family friend mentioned my scholarship offers, Dad nodded and said, "Connor does fine academically," before changing the subject. That summer, I made my decision. Though Dad had casually mentioned paying for an Ivy League education, I chose to accept a full scholarship to State University. "Why would you go there when I can afford better?" it demanded. "Because I want to do this on my own," I answered. It was the first time I saw a flicker of something other than disappointment in his eyes. Not quite respect, but perhaps surprise. It wasn't much, but it was something I could build on. Little did I know that decision would be the first step on a long road away from my father's shadow, toward building something that was entirely mine. College became my sanctuary, a place where nobody knew me as Walter Bellman's son, where my achievements stood on their own merits. While most freshmen were adjusting to doing their own laundry, I was juggling classes with 2 part-time jobs. I worked mornings at a local coffee shop and evenings, managing a small apartment building in exchange for reduced rent. Between shifts, I maintained a 3.9 GPA in business administration. During sophomore year, I met Abigail in my economics class. She challenged my answers during discussions and beat me on the midterm by 2 points. When we were paired for a project, our competitive relationship transformed into mutual respect and eventually something deeper. Unlike others who were impressed by my family name when they discovered it, Abigail was more interested in my ideas than my background. "Your perspective on urban development is fascinating," she told me one night as we sat surrounded by research papers in the library. "You see opportunities others miss." Her belief in me was intoxicating after years of feeling invisible. With Abigail's encouragement, I developed a business model for revitalizing struggling small-town commercial districts, combining my father's industry with innovative, community-centered approaches. I spent my junior and senior years refining this plan, conducting market research, and building financial projections that showed promising returns. My entrepreneurship professor, Dr. Harris, called it genuinely innovative and urged me to pursue it after graduation. For the first time, I allowed myself to imagine presenting these ideas to my father, working alongside him to implement them in Bellman properties. Perhaps this would finally be enough to earn his respect. I graduated with honors, Abigail cheering loudly from the audience while my father and Grace made a brief appearance at the ceremony before leaving for a charity gala. Tyler, now a sophomore at an elite private university, gave me an expensive watch as a graduation gift. "Dad helped me pick it out," he said, which explained why it looked more like something our father would wear than anything I'd choose for myself. 1 week after graduation, I scheduled a dinner with my father to present my business plan. I spent days preparing, practicing my presentation until I could deliver it with confident precision. I arrived at his favorite steakhouse with my materials professionally printed and bound, heart pounding with nervous anticipation. Dad arrived with Grace, Tyler, and unexpected news. "Before we order, I want to share something exciting," he announced, pouring champagne. "I've decided it's time to start bringing the next generation into Bellman properties. Tyler will be joining us this summer as Associate Development Director." The room tilted slightly. Tyler was 19, had completed only 2 years of college, and had never expressed particular interest in real estate beyond following Dad's lead. "What about his degree?" I asked, struggling to keep my voice even. "He'll finish classes part-time," Dad said dismissively. "Some opportunities can't wait. Tyler has the natural instinct for this business that can't be taught." Grace beamed at Tyler while I sat frozen, the presentation folder heavy in my lap. Dad finally seemed to notice it. "What's that you brought?" With wooden formality, I explained my business plan. As I spoke, Dad's expression shifted from polite interest to barely concealed impatience. When I finished, the silence stretched uncomfortably. "Well," he finally said, "that's certainly an academic approach. Very thorough research. I'd like to implement it at Bellman," I said directly. "I believe it could open new markets for us." Dad sighed, setting down his fork. "Connor, these community-centered approaches sound nice on paper, but they're not how real business works. We focus on premium commercial properties in growing urban markets for a reason. Your plan would divert resources into risky ventures with limited return potential. The projections show a 15% return within 3 years," I countered. "Projections created in a classroom," he dismissed. "Listen, if you want to join the company, we can find you a position in property management to start. Learn the business from the ground up, like I did." "I've been studying the business my entire life," I said, my voice rising. I've worked in property management for 3 years during college. This plan is innovative and viable. Innovation is overrated. Tried and true methods built Bellman Properties. He turned to Tyler. Sometimes the younger generation thinks they know better than 30 years of experience. Tyler looked uncomfortable, caught between us. Maybe some of Connor's ideas could be adapted? When you've earned your place in the company, you can have input, Dad told him, his tone gentler than anything I'd ever received. For now, focus on learning from me. Something broke inside me then. Years of striving for approval, of carefully measuring my words, shattered into raw honesty. Why did you even come to my graduation if this was already decided? I demanded. Did you ever intend to give me a fair chance? Connor, Grace intervened. Your father has built an incredible company. You should be grateful for any opportunity to learn from him. I've been learning from him my entire life, I replied. I've learned that nothing I do will ever be good enough. Dad's face hardened. This emotional outburst proves my point. Business isn't about feelings. It's about sound judgment. You've never had what it takes. You're useless to this family's legacy. Tyler understands what Bellman Properties needs. The restaurant continued its elegant dinner service around us as my world imploded. I stood, gathering my presentation materials. Congratulations on your new position, Tyler, I said, surprising myself with how steady my voice sounded. Dad, thank you for making things clear. I won't waste any more of your time. I walked out, ignoring my father calling my name once, half-heartedly. In my car, I sat trembling with a strange mixture of devastation and relief. The path I'd been struggling to follow had vanished, but in its place was something unexpected. Freedom to forge my own way. I drove to Abigail's apartment and told her everything. I'm done trying to earn his approval, I concluded. I'm going to build something without his help or his name. She took my hands in hers. Then let's get started. The first year of independence was brutal. I took a job with a small property management firm while trying to secure funding for my business plan in the evenings. 27 investors declined my proposal, each rejection echoing my father's dismissal. Abigail stayed with me through endless revisions and practice pitches, her faith unwavering when mine faltered. On my 28th rejection, I met Richard Barnes, a retired business developer who had competed with my father in the 90s. After my pitch, he asked questions no one else had bothered with, probing the details of community integration and long-term sustainability. Walter always was too focused on immediate returns, Richard remarked. That's not necessarily where the future of development lies. A week later, Richard offered initial funding with one condition. I needed to find additional investors to match his contribution. Prove you can convince others to believe in your vision, he challenged. With Richard's provisional backing, doors began to open. I secured the remaining investment within 2 months and leased a tiny office space in a building that had seen better days. The irony wasn't lost on me that my first headquarters would be exactly the type of overlooked property my business model aimed to revitalize. Early days were a lesson in humility. I answered phones, cleaned the office, and pitched clients, all while developing our first project, the renovation of a struggling strip mall in a once thriving manufacturing town. The property owner took a chance on my approach after 3 larger firms had proposed cookie-cutter solutions that ignored the community's specific needs. 6 months in, I experienced my first major setback when the contractor disappeared with our deposit. The small reserve fund I'd established covered the loss, but barely. That night, Abigail found me staring at the wall of our apartment at 2 a.m. Maybe my father was right, I whispered. Maybe I don't have what it takes. Your father, she said firmly, doesn't know who you've become. This is one problem. Solve it and move forward. The next day, I hired a new contractor and implemented stricter payment structures for all future projects. The lesson cost money, but proved invaluable as we grew. Around this time, I reconnected with Michael, my childhood friend who had moved away during high school. now working in finance. He provided both moral support and practical advice as I navigated business ownership. "Your father's still asking about you at the country club," he mentioned during one lunch. "Acts like he expects you to come crawling back any day now." His words reinforced my determination. I wasn't just building a business, I was proving a point. The strip mall project was completed under budget and fully leased within 4 months, using our model of partnering with local entrepreneurs and creating a community hub rather than just rental space. Local press coverage led to 2 more projects, and I hired my first employee. As the business grew, so did my personal life. Abigail and I married in a small ceremony attended by friends and her family. My father received an invitation but sent his regrets, along with an expensive set of crystal we never used. Tyler came alone, looking uncomfortable in the small gathering where nobody cared about the Bellman name. "Dad's not handling your success well," he admitted after a few drinks at the reception. "Keeps saying you'll fail once the novelty wears off." "Are you happy at Bellman Properties?" I asked him. Tyler shrugged, avoiding my eyes. "It's what I was raised for, right?" By the end of our 2nd year, I had partnered with Daniel, a brilliant architect who shared my vision for community-centered development. We complemented each other perfectly, his creative designs enhancing my business strategies. The company, now officially named Renewal Development, moved to larger offices and expanded to 7 employees. When Abigail announced she was pregnant, my perspective shifted again. Becoming a father meant confronting my own experiences of being fathered. Late at night, I would talk to the ultrasound picture, making promises about the parent I intended to be. Emma's birth transformed me. Holding my daughter, I felt a fierce protectiveness and knew instantly I would never measure her worth by arbitrary standards as my father had done with me. Success, failure, none of it mattered compared to this tiny person who had my nose and Abigail's determined chin. Michael kept me updated on family news, a service I never requested but secretly appreciated. Tyler had been promoted twice, now managing significant portions of Bellman Properties. My father occasionally asked pointed questions about my business, but never reached out directly. When Jack was born 2 years later, our family felt complete. By then, Renewal Development had expanded to 3 states, our model proving successful enough to attract attention from industry publications. We had 20 employees, a portfolio of thriving properties, and a reputation for transforming struggling areas into vibrant community spaces. One evening, as I was leaving the office, I overheard Daniel on the phone. "Yes, I work with Connor Bellman," he was saying. "No, there's no connection to Bellman Properties. Renewal is entirely his creation." That night, I realized something significant had shifted. I was no longer defining myself in opposition to my father. I had built something that stood on its own merits, something I was genuinely proud of, not because it proved him wrong, but because it was good, valuable work. The validation came when Renewal won the Urban Transformation Award for our renovation of an abandoned factory into a mixed-use space combining affordable housing, local businesses, and community facilities. Standing on stage accepting the award, I thanked my team, my family, and Richard for believing in my vision. I didn't mention my father, and for the first time, that omission wasn't a statement. He simply wasn't relevant to what we had built. The call came on a Tuesday morning. I was reviewing plans for our newest project when my assistant mentioned that Patricia Walsh, a name I vaguely recognized as my father's attorney, had called twice requesting to speak with me urgently. "Did she say what it's about?" I asked. "Just that it's a personal family matter that can't be discussed over the phone." My first thought was that something had happened to Tyler. Despite our complicated relationship, he was still my brother. I called Patricia back and arranged to meet at her office the following day. The law firm occupied the top floor of a downtown high-rise, the kind of premium real estate my father specialized in. Patricia was a composed woman in her 50s who had handled the Bellman legal affairs for as long as I could remember. Her expression gave nothing away, as she led me to a conference room with views of the city skyline. "Thank you for coming, Connor," she began formally. "I should clarify that your father is not in immediate medical danger, though his health has been declining. He has made some significant changes to his estate planning that I'm legally obligated to inform you about." She slid a document across the table. "This is a summary of your father's updated will and trust arrangements. As you'll see, he has allocated his entire estate to Tyler, including the family home, all business interests, investment accounts, and personal property." I skimmed the document, a strange numbness spreading through me. While I hadn't expected a significant inheritance, the complete exclusion was a final, legally binding declaration of my father's judgment. "There's something else you should know," Patricia continued, her professional demeanor slipping slightly. "The personal property includes family heirlooms from your mother's side that traditionally would have been divided between children. That detail cut deeper than the money. Photos, jewelry, and keepsakes from Mom that I had assumed would eventually come to me were now legally Tyler's property. I thought of Emma asking about her grandmother someday and having nothing of Mom's to share with her. "Is this unusual in your experience?" I asked, keeping my voice steady. Patricia hesitated. "Estate planning is highly personal. However, I did advise your father to reconsider this particular aspect." "Thank you for telling me," I said, standing to leave. "Connor," she added, "this amendment was made 3 months ago, after Tyler became CFO of Bellman Properties. Your father was particularly emphatic about the changes." I nodded, understanding what she couldn't say directly. This wasn't just estate planning. It was a statement about worth. That evening, I told Abigail everything while we sat on our back patio, watching Emma and Jack playing in the yard. Her initial anger on my behalf gave way to quiet concern. "Are you going to talk to him about it?" she asked. "What would be the point? He's made his position clear for years. This just puts it in writing." "It's not about the money," she said, understanding as always. "It's about your mother's things." "Yes," I admitted, "but confronting him won't change anything. I'd rather focus on what I can control." The kids' laughter floated across the yard as they chased fireflies in the summer twilight. I had built this, a home full of love and encouragement, everything my childhood hadn't been. No inheritance could match its value. The next week brought a hesitant call from Tyler. "I just found out about Dad's will," he began awkwardly. "I want you to know I had no idea he was planning this." "It's his money," I replied. "He can do what he wants with it." "It doesn't seem right," Tyler continued, "especially Mom's things. When the time comes, you should have those at least." The olive branch was unexpected. "Thanks for saying that," I said, meaning it. Tyler sighed heavily. "Can I ask you something? The commercial district development project has been struggling since I took over. The numbers aren't making sense, and Dad's breathing down my neck about it." Our conversation shifted to business advice, which felt safer than family dynamics. Tyler described issues that highlighted fundamental flaws in their approach, problems my model specifically addressed. I offered suggestions, while wondering if he would implement them. 2 days later, the business section of the city paper featured an announcement of Walter Bellman's legacy succession plan, officially naming Tyler as the sole inheritor of the Bellman fortune and business interests. The article included a quote from my father. "I'm ensuring Bellman Properties passes to the son who understands its value and has proven his commitment to its future." The following paragraph mentioned me as Walter's elder son, Connor, who left the family business to start a smaller development company. The dismissive description stung, but not as deeply as it once would have. That same week, Renewal Development was notified that our community revitalization model had been selected for a prestigious Industry Innovation Award. The irony wasn't lost on me that professional recognition came at the same moment my father publicly confirmed I wasn't worthy of his legacy. The award ceremony was scheduled for the same night as a major Bellman Properties gala. Several clients who normally attended my father's events chose our celebration instead, a shift in industry allegiance that wouldn't go unnoticed in my father's circles. As I accepted the award, I spoke about the importance of measuring success, not just in profit margins, but in community impact. I didn't mention my father or Bellman Properties, but those familiar with both companies understood the contrast I was highlighting. Afterward, a reporter asked if I had any response to my father's recent announcement about his succession plans. Looking at Abigail across the room, surrounded by our team celebrating our shared achievement, I finally had clarity. My father taught me that there are many ways to measure value, I replied. I'm grateful for the lesson. The quote appeared in the next day's business section, my only public acknowledgement of the inheritance situation. Privately, I began the process of accepting that this final rejection was actually a release. I was free to stop waiting for approval that would never come. Tyler's calls became more frequent as Bellman Properties encountered increasing difficulties. What began as occasional requests for advice evolved into weekly problem-solving sessions that I accommodated out of familial obligation, rather than any lingering hope for reconciliation with my father. The West Side project is hemorrhaging money, Tyler confessed during one such call. The contractors are finding structural issues that weren't in the inspection reports, and the anchor tenant is threatening to pull out. I offered practical solutions, drawing from our experiences with similar challenges at renewal. Tyler listened intently, taking notes and asking thoughtful questions that suggested he was more capable than our father had allowed him to demonstrate. When Abigail suggested hosting a family dinner, I reluctantly agreed. Tyler arrived with his wife Sarah, whom I had met only briefly at their wedding 3 years earlier. She was polished and poised in a way that reminded me uncomfortably of Grace, my father's wife. The evening was tense despite our efforts. While the children played, Sarah made subtle comments about our home. "It's so cozy compared to your childhood house," she remarked. Tyler says, "The Bellman estate has 7 bedrooms and a tennis court." "We like cozy," Abigail replied evenly. "It suits our family." When conversation turned to business, Sarah's demeanor shifted. "Tyler's managing over $200 million in assets now," she announced. "Walter says he's exceeded all expectations for the quarterly projections." Tyler looked uncomfortable. "Actually, we're facing some challenges with the urban portfolio. Connor's been helping me strategize solutions." "Consulting for the competition, Connor?" Sarah asked with a brittle laugh. "Maybe Walter should put you on payroll." The evening concluded earlier than planned, with Tyler apologizing as they left. "Sarah's under pressure from Dad and Grace to maintain certain appearances," he explained lamely. A month later, I attended an industry conference where Walter was scheduled to deliver the keynote address. I had planned to avoid the session, but curiosity drew me to the back of the ballroom just as he began speaking. "Adaptation is essential in our industry," my father proclaimed from the podium. "At Bellman Properties, we're pioneering a community integration model that transforms struggling commercial zones into thriving multi-use spaces." He continued describing an approach nearly identical to the one I had presented to him years ago and had since refined at renewal. Tyler sat in the front row, nodding along as our father claimed my ideas as Bellman innovations. After the speech, I confronted Tyler in a quiet corner of the convention center. "That was my model," he described. "The exact approach you've been asking me about for months." Tyler had the grace to look ashamed. "I implemented your suggestions on the Riverside project. Dad was impressed with the results and wanted to expand the approach. Without acknowledgement of where it came from?" "I tried to tell him," Tyler insisted. "He said good ideas should stay in the family anyway." "I am family," I replied. "Or at least I was, until I became competition." Tyler's expression hardened slightly. "You chose to leave, Connor. You could have stayed, worked your way up." Under his thumb, implementing watered-down versions of my ideas while he took credit? No thanks. "Do you have any idea what it's like being the one who stayed?" Tyler's voice rose slightly. "Every success is because I'm Walter's son, and every failure is because I'm not Connor. He compares us constantly now that your company keeps winning awards." The revelation surprised me. He talks about me? All the time. Connor would have anticipated this problem. Connor wouldn't have approved that design. It's exhausting living in the shadow of the son he drove away. I felt a complicated mixture of vindication and pity. I'm sorry he puts that on you. But using my ideas without credit isn't the solution. We parted with an unresolved tension that persisted through subsequent family gatherings. Our conversations became strictly transactional, focused on the children's birthdays or obligatory holidays, rather than the business advice Tyler had sought previously. Meanwhile, renewal continued its upward trajectory. We expanded into 5 states, our reputation growing with each successful project. I was invited to speak at conferences where, just years earlier, my father had been the industry voice. We purchased a lakeside vacation home, a personal milestone that represented security built entirely on my own terms. Most importantly, I focused on being the father I had needed. I attended Emma's ballet recitals and Jack's t-ball games with my phone turned off and my attention fully present. We had family dinners where achievements were celebrated regardless of perfection, where effort and character were valued above results. During this period, Walter remained distant, communicating only through Tyler or occasional public statements that referenced me obliquely. A business magazine featured renewal in its annual Innovators issue, highlighting our community-first approach as disrupting traditional commercial development models pioneered by established firms like Bellman Properties. When asked about the family connection, I responded simply, "Every entrepreneur is shaped by their early influences, whether following those examples or choosing different paths. I'm grateful for the lessons that led me here." The quote was diplomatic, but industry insiders recognized the subtle reference to diverging from my father's methods. Tyler called that evening, his voice tight. "Dad's furious about your magazine interview. Says you're deliberately positioning yourself against the family legacy." I answered a direct question without mentioning him at all. I pointed out, "You know how he reads into things." Tyler sounded tired. "Just wanted to warn you that he's on the warpath. I appreciate the heads up, but his opinion stopped dictating my choices a long time ago." After hanging up, I reflected on how dramatically our positions had shifted. Tyler, the golden child who had received everything, now seemed trapped in a gilded cage of our father's expectations. Meanwhile, I had built something authentic that reflected my own values rather than an inherited vision. The ultimate validation came when a major institutional investor chose renewal over Bellman for a $50 million urban renewal project. The client specifically cited our proven track record, with community integration models as the deciding factor. The project would become our largest to date, cementing our transition from up-and-coming firm to established industry player. I didn't call my father to gloat. In truth, the achievement felt complete on its own terms without reference to our complicated history. The company's success was no longer about proving him wrong, but about proving we were right about what development could accomplish. That night, celebrating with Abigail and our team, I realized I had finally stopped measuring my worth against my father's assessment. The useless son had built something valuable entirely on his own terms. The first signs of trouble at Bellman Properties appeared in an industry newsletter, a brief mention of delayed payments to contractors on 3 major developments. I might have dismissed it as typical project complications if Michael hadn't called with insider information. "Something's seriously wrong at your father's company," he said without preamble. "The downtown hotel project has been halted mid-construction, and there are rumors about financing issues." "Tyler hasn't mentioned anything," I replied, though we hardly spoke anymore beyond perfunctory family obligations. "Would he tell you if there were problems?" "From what I hear, your father has forbidden anyone from acknowledging difficulties publicly." My curiosity piqued. I began paying closer attention to industry news. Bellman Properties had always projected unshakable stability, but subtle indicators suggested otherwise. Key executives departing, project timelines extending, and unusually aggressive pricing on premium properties that suggested cash flow concerns. 3 weeks later, The business section reported financial irregularities at Bellman Properties, with anonymous sources citing accounting discrepancies discovered during a routine audit. The article was carefully worded to avoid direct accusations, but the implication of financial mismanagement was clear. Tyler finally called, his voice strained to breaking point. "Have you seen the news?" "Just the article about the audit," I replied. "What's actually happening, Tyler?" "I can't discuss it," he said mechanically. "Our legal team advises against any statements that could be misconstrued." "I'm not a reporter. I'm your brother," I pointed out, "who runs a competing firm." The words held an accusation he couldn't quite voice. "If you need help, personal help, I'm here," I offered. "Everything's under control," he insisted before ending the call abruptly. A week later, Michael invited me to lunch with news he wouldn't share over the phone. We met at a quiet restaurant away from the business district, where he leaned across the table with uncharacteristic seriousness. "Your father's company is facing bankruptcy," he stated bluntly. "Multiple projects are underwater, and they've been using creative accounting to hide losses for at least 2 years. How bad is it?" "Terminal, from what my sources say." Tyler made a series of expansion decisions that stretched their capital too thin, then tried to cover losses from one project with funds from others. When the market softened last quarter, the whole house of cards started collapsing. I absorbed this information with complex emotions. While I had no desire to see Tyler or even my father suffer, there was an undeniable symmetry to the situation. The golden child's decisions had endangered the legacy I had been deemed unworthy to share. "Is Tyler at fault? Or is this my father's doing?" I asked. Michael shrugged. "From what I understand, Tyler made the initial mistakes, but Walter compounded them by refusing to acknowledge problems until it was too late. His reputation is built on infallibility, so admitting failure wasn't an option." That evening, my phone displayed an unfamiliar number. When I answered, the voice on the other end was immediately recognizable despite the years of silence. "Connor." My father's tone was clipped, formal. "We need to talk." I said nothing, the shock of hearing his voice after so long momentarily robbing me of response. "I understand if you're angry," he continued into my silence. "But this is important. Family business." "I'm not part of the family business," I replied finally. "You made that very clear." "Don't be childish," he snapped, reverting to his familiar dismissiveness. "This situation requires discretion and immediate attention." "What situation would that be?" He paused. "I prefer not to discuss specifics over the phone. Can we meet tomorrow?" "No," I said simply. "Whatever you need to say, you can tell me now or put it in writing." He hung up without another word. The next day, 3 more calls from his number went unanswered. I instructed my assistant to tell him I was unavailable if he contacted the office directly. 2 days later, Walter appeared in the lobby of Renewal's headquarters. My assistant texted me a warning, allowing me to decide whether to face him or avoid the confrontation. After a moment's consideration, I asked her to tell him I was in meetings all day and suggest he make an appointment. He left without argument, which itself indicated how much had changed. The Walter Bellman I knew would never have accepted being turned away. The following week brought a formal letter on Bellman Properties stationery. The carefully worded message referenced mutual business opportunities and family considerations before requesting financial assistance to weather temporary market fluctuations. It concluded with a proposed meeting to discuss terms beneficial to all parties. The letter contained no apology, no acknowledgement of our history, not even a personal greeting beyond my name in the salutation. It was a business proposition from someone who clearly still viewed me as a subordinate who should be grateful for the opportunity to assist. I showed the letter to Abigail, who read it with raised eyebrows. "He's asking for a bailout without actually asking," she observed. "Classic Walter, from what you've told me." "What would you do?" I asked her. She considered the question seriously. "I think that depends on what you want from this situation. Revenge, reconciliation, or just to be left alone?" Her question forced me to examine my own feelings. The wounded son in me wanted vindication, wanted Walter to explicitly acknowledge his misjudgment. The businessman recognized that Bellman's collapse could have industry-wide repercussions that might affect renewal. And the father I had become understood that holding on to resentment served no one. "I don't know yet," I admitted. Before I could decide, Tyler appeared at our house, unannounced one Sunday afternoon. He looked terrible, with dark circles under his eyes and a defeated slump to his shoulders that contrasted sharply with his usual confident posture. "I know I should have called first," he began as I invited him inside. "But I needed to talk to you away from the office, away from Dad." Abigail took the children to the backyard to give us privacy. When we were alone, Tyler's carefully maintained facade crumbled completely. "It's all falling apart," he confessed, voice breaking. "The company, Dad's health, everything. We're weeks away from bankruptcy unless we find major capital infusion." "What happened?" I asked, though I already knew the broad strokes. "I made mistakes," he admitted. "Overextended on developments that looked promising but had hidden problems. Dad wouldn't let me pull back when things started going sideways, insisted we could power through with sheer will, like he always had." I listened as Tyler detailed a perfect storm of bad decisions, market shifts, and stubborn refusal to adapt. The picture that emerged was of a company run on outdated principles, unable to evolve as the industry changed around it. "Dad's been trying to reach you," Tyler said finally. "He sent a business letter asking for money without a single word of apology or recognition for how he's treated me," I replied. "Did he really expect that would work?" Tyler looked down. "He's not well, Connor. The stress has affected his heart. And Grace." "What about Grace?" "She left last month when it became clear the money was running out. Took what she could liquidate from their accounts first." The news shouldn't have surprised me, but somehow did. I had never particularly liked Grace, but her abandonment of my father, during his darkest hour, seemed especially cruel. "I'm sorry to hear that," I said, meaning it despite everything. "Dad would never admit it. But he needs you," Tyler continued. "Not just financially, but he keeps saying he should have listened to you years ago, that your community model would have saved us." The admission I had once desperately wanted now arrived too late to provide the validation I had sought. Yet it stirred something unexpected, a flicker of compassion for the proud man facing the collapse of everything he had built. "I'll think about talking to him," I said finally. "But I won't bail out the company unconditionally. There would need to be significant changes." Tyler nodded, relief visible in his exhausted face. "That's all I'm asking. Just talk to him." After Tyler left, I sat alone considering the strange reversal of our situations. The brother who had received everything now came asking for help. The father who had judged me useless now needed me to rescue his legacy. The cosmic irony wasn't lost on me, yet it brought less satisfaction than I might once have imagined. That evening, as Abigail and I discussed the situation, my perspective clarified. This isn't about winning or losing anymore, I realized. It's about what kind of person I want to be, especially in front of our children. "And what kind of person is that?" she asked, gently. "Someone who doesn't let past hurts determine future choices," I replied. "Someone who can set boundaries without seeking revenge." The next day, I called my father and agreed to meet. We met at a neutral location, a quiet conference room in my attorney's office building. I arrived early, half expecting my father to cancel or send Tyler in his place. Instead, he appeared precisely on time, looking noticeably older than when I had last seen him. His commanding presence had diminished, replaced by a weariness that physical ailments couldn't fully explain. "Thank you for agreeing to meet," he began formally, remaining standing until I gestured toward a chair. "Tyler says you wanted to talk," I replied neutrally. Walter nodded, adjusting his position uncomfortably. For perhaps the first time in our relationship, he seemed uncertain how to proceed. The silence stretched between us, filled with decades of unspoken words. Bellman Properties is facing significant challenges, he finally said, falling back on business language as his comfort zone. I'm aware of the situation, I acknowledged. But I suspect you didn't ask to meet just to discuss business projections. He looked away briefly, his fingers tapping against the conference table. No, he admitted. That's not the only reason. Another silence fell, this one heavier than the last. I waited, determined not to fill the void with reassurances or make this easier for him. Whatever bridge might be built between us, he needed to lay the first plank. I've been unfair to you, he said finally, the words seeming to physically pain him. For most of your life, actually. The admission, so long awaited, landed with less impact than I had imagined in my various mental rehearsals of this moment. Perhaps because it came too late, or perhaps because I had already found validation elsewhere. Yes, I agreed simply. You have. After your mother died, he continued with visible effort. I couldn't. I didn't know how to connect with you. You reminded me so much of her. The same questioning mind, the same quiet determination. Tyler was easier, more like me. So you pushed me away because I reminded you of Mom? The explanation seemed both inadequate and strangely believable. Partly that, he acknowledged, and partly because I recognized something in you that intimidated me, an innovative thinking that I lacked. It was easier to dismiss your ideas than to admit the industry was changing in ways I couldn't fully grasp. He looked directly at me then, his usual commanding gaze replaced by something more vulnerable. I was wrong about you being useless to the family legacy. If anything, you understood the future of real estate development better than I did. Your success at Renewal proves that. The words I had once desperately wanted to hear now arrived when I no longer needed them for validation. Yet they still affected me, closing a wound that had never fully healed. Thank you for saying that, I replied, surprised by the steadiness of my voice. It matters, even now. Walter nodded, seeming to gather himself for the real purpose of our meeting. I know I have no right to ask anything of you, but Bellman Properties is more than just a company to me. It's my life's work, and I can't bear to see it dismantled. What exactly are you asking for? Financial support would help in the immediate crisis, he admitted. But more than that, I need your expertise. The community-centered approach you've pioneered at Renewal could save several of our struggling developments. The request was both honest and strategic, acknowledging my success while appealing to my sentiment about the family business. The old Walter would have approached this as a negotiation where he held all the power. This new version, humbled by failure and abandonment, was actually listening. I won't provide unconditional financial support, I stated clearly. That wouldn't solve the underlying problems. But I might consider a structured business arrangement with specific terms and conditions. Relief flickered across his face. That's more than I expected, given our history. Our history is precisely why any arrangement would need clear boundaries, I explained. I'm willing to help, but not at the expense of what I've built at Renewal or my family's well-being. We spent the next hour outlining a potential collaboration. Renewal would acquire certain Bellman properties that aligned with our development model, providing needed capital, while preserving projects with viable futures. I would consult on restructuring the remaining business, but operational control would involve a professional management team rather than family dynamics. As our discussion concluded, Walter hesitated before adding, "There's one more thing. The amendment to my will, the one that excluded you. I've instructed Patricia to reverse those changes, particularly regarding your mother's possessions." "Thank you," I said simply. "That means more than the business arrangements." He nodded, understanding that some wounds went deeper than financial concerns. As we prepared to leave, he asked awkwardly, "Would it be possible to see Emma and Jack sometime? I've been a poor excuse for a grandfather." "We can arrange something," I agreed cautiously. "But it would need to be on their terms, not dictated by adult agendas." They're people, not extensions of a legacy. I'm learning that lesson very late, he acknowledged with unexpected humility. The following weeks brought careful implementation of our agreement. Tyler initially seemed relieved that I had agreed to help, though tension remained as we navigated the new power dynamic. The first family dinner with Walter present was awkward but civil, with Emma and Jack cautiously accepting this suddenly present grandfather, who brought them thoughtfully selected gifts and actually asked about their interests. Professionally, Renewal's acquisition of key Bellman properties proceeded smoothly, with our team implementing community-centered approaches that began showing positive results within months. The remaining Bellman holdings were restructured into a smaller but more sustainable company, with professional management and Tyler in a position better suited to his actual skills rather than our father's expectations. Most surprisingly, Walter began showing genuine interest in my children's lives, attending Jack's soccer games and asking Emma about her science projects with authentic curiosity rather than measuring their achievements against external standards. He remained formal and sometimes awkward, decades of habits not easily broken, but the effort was unmistakable. He's different with them than he was with us, I observed to Tyler during a rare moment of brotherly connection as we watched Walter helping Jack practice throwing a baseball in the backyard. Nearly losing everything changed him, Tyler replied. I'm not sure if it's age, health scares, or Grace leaving, but something broke through that wall he always maintained. Our own relationship gradually thawed as well, the competitive dynamic imposed by our father giving way to a more authentic connection based on our actual personalities rather than assigned roles. Tyler eventually found his own path, leveraging his networking skills in a consulting role that suited him far better than operations management. Walter's health stabilized once the acute business crisis passed, though he never fully regained his former vigor. We established a weekly lunch where we discussed industry trends, and sometimes, with increasing frequency, personal matters. These conversations remained somewhat guarded, but grew more genuine with time. I never received the dramatic apology scene from movies, but his consistent effort to change spoke louder than any single conversation could have. At home, I doubled down on my commitment to parenting differently than I had been parented. When Emma struggled with a difficult math concept, we worked through it together without judgment. When Jack's first attempt at team sports ended with him wanting to try something different, we supported the change without questioning his commitment or comparing him to others. You're an amazing father, Abigail told me one evening as we watched the children getting ready for bed. They never doubt they're valued exactly as they are. That's the whole point, I replied. Success is important, but it's not the measure of their worth. Renewal continued to thrive, our community-centered approach becoming an industry standard rather than an innovation. I occasionally caught Walter studying our project reports with a mixture of pride and regret that suggested he was thinking about what might have been if he had embraced my ideas years earlier. During one of our lunches, nearly a year after our reconciliation began, he said something that surprised me. You know, I used to think legacy was about passing down exactly what I had built, preserved in amber. Now I realize true legacy is evolution, the next generation improving on the foundation. That's surprisingly philosophical coming from you, I observed. He smiled slightly. Having your life's work nearly collapse focuses the mind on what actually matters. After a pause, he added, I'm proud of what you've built, Connor. Not because it saved parts of my company, but because it's genuinely better than what I created. The words were simple but profound coming from a man who had spent decades unable to acknowledge others' achievements. I nodded, accepting the compliment without needing to dissect its significance. We had both come too far for that. That evening, as I helped Jack with a school project, I realized how completely the cycle had been broken. My son would never know the ache of striving for approval that remained perpetually out of reach. My daughter would never question her value, based on arbitrary standards of achievement. The final healing came unexpectedly during Renewal's 10th anniversary celebration. Walter attended as my guest, visibly proud as industry leaders acknowledged the company's impact. During the reception, a young developer approached me for advice, mentioning that my community-centered model had inspired his career choice. "You should meet my father," I said, bringing Walter into the conversation. "He taught me that there are many ways to measure success in this business." Walter's surprised expression at my generous framing of our complicated history gave way to genuine engagement with the young developer. Later, he thanked me for the introduction, with an understanding of what that moment had really meant between us. The inheritance that once seemed so important had become almost irrelevant. I had built something more valuable than anything that could have been handed to me. A business based on my own vision, a family rooted in unconditional love, and eventually, a relationship with my father based on mutual respect rather than power dynamics. Being called useless had ultimately pushed me to create a life defined by genuine value, measured on my own terms. The journey from rejection to self-defined success had been painful but necessary, revealing strengths I might never have discovered in the comfort of an inherited path. What would you do if a parent who rejected you suddenly needed your help? Have you ever had to set boundaries with family while still showing compassion? Share your thoughts in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please hit the like button and subscribe to hear more real-life experiences about finding your own path. Remember, true success isn't measured by what others hand you, but by what you build yourself. Thank you for listening to my story, and I wish you the courage to define your own value, regardless of others' judgments.